Wanting to incorporate more digital tools into your closing process, but not sure where to start? ProperSign is the remote online notarization platform with solutions for e-signing, e-notarization, identity verification, and more. So whether you need to perform a RON or RIN or anything in between, ProperSign has been called surprisingly simple to use by some of the title industry's pickiest professionals. For a limited time, you can get a 30-day trial of the tool completely free. To get this offer, visit propersign.com/safe-secure-closing. That's propersign.com/safe-secure-closing. Now, back to Title Talks.
We've been sort of watching this just sort of accelerate at a speed we would never have ever imagined.
We entered the year 2020 with a strong housing market and economy, but that all quickly changed as the spread of COVID-19 became a real threat to U.S. citizens and industries. Thanks to the designation of title work as essential, this industry hasn't seen the same slowdown as others, but there have been significant changes spurred on by the virus. One survey showed that nearly 30% of agents now offer some version of digital closings. To reflect on those changes, I spoke to Diane Tomb, CEO of the American Land Title Association, back in June during Home Ownership Month. We talked about ALTA's campaign to better connect title agents with consumers, the organization's involvement in remote online notarization legislation, the importance of diversity in the industry at all levels, and much more. I'm Amanda Farrell, and you're listening to Title Talks. Hello, how are you?
Hey, good, Amanda. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm really excited to be here.
So to start out, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, your experience in the title industry.
You bet. Diane Tomb. I am the CEO of the American Land Title Association, more commonly known as ALTA. I stepped into this role, it'll be a year in 2 weeks, which is crazy, especially since the last 4 months, it feels like it's been about 20 years, right? Just because so much has happened. I heard this great quote earlier this week from, of all people, Vladimir Lenin, who said, there's decades that go by, nothing happens, and then weeks where decades happen, right? And I just feel like since COVID hit for our industry, and I know many others, things that have happened would never have happened in decades in this short period of time when it comes to technology and other things. So it's been really fascinating to kind of see how the industry has sort of adjusted and, you know, what's happening. But so a little more background about me. Before I took over this role, I started the organization for the National Rental Home Council, which was a organization when I started. They had about 6 members, and they grew to about 60 in about 3 years. And they're sort of the large-scale single-family rental and all the industry that supports that. And as you can imagine, now, you know, the rental industry is even more vital to this economy. So that was an exciting role for me. I also used to head up the National Association of Women Business Owners and was a business owner for about 15 years. So I believe those experiences really allowed me to step into this role and bring something, because so many of our members, actually, you may know this, Amanda, or the industry as a whole, over 75% are women. And then, of course, we have a lot of small business owners. So it's been a really, really awesome opportunity this first year for me to learn more about the title industry. A little additional background, I did work at HUD. Trying to think what year that was. I always do things in terms of the years of when my kids were born. And that was in the early 2000s. And so I was fortunate to have a regulatory background and kind of understand that piece of it, and worked really closely on RESPA, which I know is, seems like eons ago, because it was. So much has happened since then. So it's been, for me, coming into the title industry has been, I know a lot about the housing world and others, but learning so much about the title industry and the important role they play in the whole ecosystem.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I'm really excited then to speak with you and glean some of that insight that you have through all those years of experience and knowledge. So my first question is about, ALTA does a really great job of home ownership, outreach, and other educational campaigns. And I wanted to ask you about some current campaigns that you're running right now to spotlight the title industry.
Yes, well, thank you, because as you know, June is Home Ownership Month. And interesting enough, even with COVID, we are seeing our industry continuing to, between the refis and people buying homes, things have not really stopped. But I think the most important thing that we find regarding our campaign is educating people on the process, how to access down payment, how to understand, how to prepare themselves, particularly in today's world and what's going on out there. ALTA, as you know, does a really good job of communicating. We have our HOP program, home ownership program, that really helps people kind of understand the importance of it and helps our members communicate that to their clients, etc. But one of the things that we started when I stepped into this role, the ALTA leadership gets together every year and sets their strategic priorities. And this time last year, again, before the COVID-19, but all of it turned out to be very relevant, fortunately. One of the top strategic priorities was telling our story, because I found this, when I stepped into this industry, people kind of know what title is. They know it's something that they should have, but they're not really sure how people who do that, who are the agents, who are the underwriters, how's all that work? And I think as an industry, we've done a really good job of talking to each other, but we haven't really shared it with the outside world. So that's been a big effort for us. And we've been really excited about working with this organization that we brought in to help us tell our story. Early in when the COVID-19, the coronavirus hit, they helped us put together a video that really demonstrated the work that the title industry is doing quickly, how quickly they pivoted and were able to come up with some really innovative solutions to keep these transactions moving forward. And just yesterday, as a matter of fact, we rolled out our June campaign, the Guardians of Homeownership, because we really want it, and we have a new video, and hopefully you and your listeners will take a moment to go to our website, which is alta.org. We have our new video up there, because I think it's one of the most simple ways to really describe all the different things that our members do to ensure, to protect, the homeowners at the end. They're detectives, right? They're going in and trying to find information. They're guardians, right? They're detail oriented. They have all of these roles that they have to play at the end of the day to make sure this deal gets done right and it protects the homeowner. So I'm anxious for you to see it. And I would really encourage others to take a look, because we're really excited about being able to do this. So that's a big piece of it. We're going to have some digital outreach that will continue around that effort, and really just educating folks outside of our industry on what it is we do, the important role. And again, I can't overemphasize how once the virus hit and we had to come up with new solutions of doing our work, how people started to realize how important our piece of the closing process was.
I had no idea what a title agent was until I started working at PropLogix 5 years ago.
Right.
Every time I talk to people about the industry, something they always say is it's a very hidden industry. Homeowners usually, when asked, do you have title insurance? A lot of people answer, I'm not sure.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a really great campaign to start to really get title agents more involved, and especially early on too. I think that's pretty key right now, especially with wire fraud concerns, reaching out to that home buyer and homeowner and saying, I'm the person that's going to be, like you said, the guardian of your transaction. Be very clear that wire fraud is a thing, because most people don't know about that until it happens to them, unfortunately. And, really take those steps to build that relationship early on and educate people more when they're doing the home buying process.
Yeah, no question. As you know, most of the time, the title agent or the underwriter, they're brought in by the realtor or the lender or someone else. So it's really not until they sit down at the closing table does the home buyer really kind of understand. And by then they're so overwhelmed by all the paperwork and everything else so what we're trying to do is just like you said, Amanda, kind of intervene early on, kind of educate people on the front end so they can be aware and, anticipate some of these things, but make sure people really understand the value on the back end. The good news is, a lot of times people don't have these issues because these guys are doing the work on the front end.
I also wanted to ask a little bit about, what sort of conversations have you had with title professionals regarding the adoption of digital tools in closings? And can you kind of frame it around maybe before COVID and after COVID?
Absolutely. Well, when I stepped into this role, or even earlier, a little this time last year, maybe a little even sooner, when I was interviewing for this role, that was sort of the big discussion about how the industry is shifting. And, some like it, some don't. What's it going to look like? Some have the ability to adjust, others don't, and ALTA needs to play a big role, right? They need to sort of be on the front end, but they also need to bring everybody else along. It's almost as though we don't really have a choice. It's going to happen. It's just, making sure that we have all the tools in place so people can be successful. And so one of the first things we did, as I was talking about our strategic priorities, one of our other top strategic priorities was the digital closings and sort of getting that up and running. And again, when I started this time last year, we were just talking about it, but quickly in the fall, September, October timeframe, we forged a partnership with mortgage bankers, and we put together a series of digital boot camps. And it's been really exciting to kind of watch that. The first one was in person, was in Phoenix, and it was around Christmas time. And we chose that location because we thought geographically there'd be enough folks that were interested from that area that could go. It's a hard time because of the holidays and what have you, but also from our industry perspective, it was one of the slower times where people aren't, working where they wouldn't be able to leave their roles. Well, we were shocked that people came from all over, as far as the East goes and then the West Coast. And I mean, people were just thirsting for this information, and these are the folks that, I would say what I learned from within the industry are the early adapters. These are the folks who really wanted to get their arms around this, wanted to understand how it's being done. And there were some that were doing it sort of in a hybrid fashion and learning. And the whole day, it was a one day, we had a reception the night before, and then we had a one day panel of amazing folks from throughout the industry, both on the mortgage banker side, the lending side, as well as on the title side. And you could just tell people just wanted more. There just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough time. There was so much that needed to be covered. And so that was a real wake-up call for us. We're like, wow, we're really onto something. We recognize, our next one was scheduled for Atlanta in April. And we thought, we're probably going to need to have 2 days. We're going to need to, and so much was happening even from that time frame. So from December to April, even prior to COVID, there was a lot of nuances of states adapting new things and, different things happening in industry wide that we had to keep adjusting our panels and what we were focusing on. And then of course, March 13th was, at least in our case, when we shut down our office. I mean, we physically left our offices. We've all been working, as I'm sure you have. I think things have not stopped. We've been sort of watching this just sort of accelerate at a speed we would never have ever imagined, so it's been really interesting, but it was clear to us as an industry that there was this thirst and folks really wanting to figure out how to make this work.
Yeah, I remember January 1st was a really big day for a lot of states for RON. That's when RON became implemented in Florida, and people started to get their certifications. And that's when we saw, I actually spoke to a loan signing agent who's located in South Florida. And in the beginning of the year, she was like, oh, this is something really interesting. I definitely want to adopt this into my work and offer this as something to my clients, but I'm going to wait a little bit to see how, things go and see how the kinks are worked out. Then COVID happened, and she was like, okay, now's the time.
Right? Yeah, everybody. It just kind of opened the doors for lots of things.
And so in those boot camps and other conversations, what are some of the challenges to getting Ron enabled that you've heard from people? Is it a matter of lack of education, lack of understanding of local laws? What are some of the things that people find most challenging about it?
You know, Amanda, it's really is a combination of all of those things. You know, you have some states like California that they just don't feel like they're ready for it, right? And so they don't feel like they have the infrastructure. And so in some ways that makes it really hard for, you know, folks who are doing business, you know, in California, but also in other states. There's, you know, a lot of different, one of the things that we've been doing at the federal level is we have proposed the secure legislation, which would at least until this pandemic is over, allow everybody in every state to be able to do RON. And if a state was currently in the process of passing some type of legislation, that would supersede it. But at least it sets a standard. So we think that's really one of the most important things, to have a standard across the board that everybody can agree to. So there's the education piece, there's the you know, the folks who are willing, the early adapters that we talked about, there's the logistical piece, there's just, you know, the processes, getting the, you know, infrastructure in place to support it. And then there's the marketing piece of it. To your point, you were talking about one of your customers, you know, I'm going to wait and see what someone else does before I shift my whole business model, you know, to support that. So we're seeing a lot of that. And then we're also seeing, like, we really don't have any other choice. This is how we're going to do it, because, you know, in these certain conditions. But what's been really, really fascinating for us is how people have really figured it out. You know, we had so many different challenges that kept presenting themselves each day. And, you know, we kept working to figure these things out, which was really amazing.
And so about the Secure Act, what are some of the most important aspects of that? For those who are listening who might not be familiar with the legislation, can you kind of give just like a quick rundown of what it entails?
Sure. Well, we've asked Congress for three things when it comes to that: to allow immediate nationwide use of RON. Secondly, to create minimum standards for these types of notarizations. And then third, to provide certainty for the interstate recognition of RONs. The consumer protections we have requested included the multi-facet authentication, use of tamper-evident technology, and retention of the audio-visual recording of the notarial act. So as you know, there's lots of different ways that can be interpreted, but this was the one that we felt would really allow folks now. And, you know, one of the challenges with this legislation is that it would be sunsetted, you know, once, you know, the pandemic is sort of under control. But at least in the meantime, it gives people access, and it allows us to really kind of, from an industry-wide perspective, see what works and what doesn't work, and how can we sort of, you know, enable. And we're getting lots of good feedback, things we didn't expect, and new things that we knew were going to be challenges, those types of things.
And can you talk a little bit about ALTA's role in the creation of the legislation? I think you also mentioned your partnership with the MBA,
Right.
and maybe talk a little bit about, you know, this legislation, the model legislation that's sort of been a part of the push at the other state, local levels for RON laws.
Sure. Yeah, you know, it was a, you know, from an industry perspective, it was something that our advocacy folks jumped on immediately once we recognized that, you know, things were going to be shut down. Well, there were two things. One, it was, you know, making sure we established that our industry was essential. And that took a lot of work on our part to, you know, make sure the folks over at Treasury and Homeland Security and others understood the role that we play. And then ALTA really led the effort on crafting the Secure Notarization Act. The entire project was initiated at the direction of our Digital Closing Executive Committee. Members of this committee also took the lead on drafting, and I really think it's important to give special recognition to Michael O'Neill, who was the chief drafter. For those who don't know Michael, he's with First American, and really spent a lot of time, and it was really critical for us in the early stages of COVID-19 when this was going down. Believe it or not, the legislation was written over a course of just 3 short days, you know, which that never happens in the real world, right? And even in that condensed time period, it was successful in encapsulating the priorities of many stakeholder groups, while at the same time providing certainty through a strong legal foundation. And these groups include, you mentioned MBA, National Association of Realtors, the American Bankers, and even some notary companies. There was a really a broad group of industry-wide folks who support the real estate industry supporting this effort. It was really exciting to be a part of that.
Can you tell me a little bit about how the legislation impacts states? Should they have already passed RON laws, or if they haven't, or if they are going to be passing a RON bill later?
Yeah, that's a really important point, Amanda. It's important to note that state RON laws that meet the national minimum standards I previously outlined will supersede the federal act. So bottom line is, right, what if the state already has something, what they're doing at the federal level. But as you know, many states don't. But like, for example, if your state has passed a RON law and it is not yet in effect, the Secure Notarization Act would allow you to immediately start using RON, but once regulations are promulgated in the state, those regulations would not apply. So, but because strong state legislation will supersede the Secure Notarization Act, states that have not passed RON legislation should continue to look into their own state law. You know, eventually we want this to be everywhere, right? Right now, this is a sort of a temporary fix. You should also be aware that there is likely to be a sunset provision as part of this legislation, which is further incentive for states to continue with their own long-term efforts to draft and pass RON laws that work best in their state.
And how do you respond to security concerns that people have about RON?
That's probably been one of the biggest, you know, across the board, at least, and primarily before COVID hit. That was something that, you know, we all wrestled with. But when the reality of having to get it done, it sort of shifted a little bit. But I will tell you, we believe that the states that follow the ALTA MBA model have appropriately addressed the risks related to that. In today's digital world, third-party, multi-factor authentication, like that's required in the RON legislation, is the gold standard for the identity verification.
Yeah, I actually, when I was speaking to that loan officer or loan signing agent that I mentioned before, she mentioned that one of the things that interested her most about remote online notarization and the tools that are designed specifically for that is that it's actually statistically more secure because you have a computer scanning a license that, you know, notaries with the naked eye had trouble sometimes recognizing as fraudulent.
Yep.
And then you also had people entering in those knowledge base assessment, KBA, I think that's what it stands for, those questions about their personal, you know, credit history. And so in a lot of ways, it was more rigorous than she felt than the current standard because the technology is a helping tool and it's not necessarily like replacing her as a notary. It's helping her do her job better.
Yeah, and I think that was the fear, to your point, like, you know, people won't need us anymore. No, to your point, all the technology is a tool to better serve your client, but obviously you still need, you know, the folks involved to make sure that it happens accurately.
And what do you think are going to be some of the most positive impacts of the Secure Act and other RON legislation that is moving forward at the state level on title agents, on lenders, on consumers?
Well, without a doubt, consumers most vulnerable to the COVID-19 benefit from the ability to conduct a touchless transaction, right? We've seen that just from day one, which has been amazing. At one point, RON was thought to be primarily about consumer convenience, but times have changed and now it's about consumer safety, right? Obviously, when it comes to industry and lenders in particular, RON is one resource in the toolbox to get us closer to enabling the broad adoption of e-mortgages, which has been a goal for over 2 decades now. So, you know, we're inching towards that, but I think these last 4 months have pushed us really farther along, much further than we would ever have anticipated. And then finally, as an industry, we are at a point where we can reimagine our business models. You know, I would challenge all title professionals to consider how RON fits in their business practice of the future. And I also wanted to mention in 2017, ALTA developed the RON principles focused on adequate safeguards, authentication, tamper-evident technology, and retention. Much has changed in the digital closing space due to COVID, and ALTA is finalizing principles right now regarding any type of remote notarization outside of emergencies such as COVID. And the core of principles focused on technology, protecting consumers and ensuring usability continues.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, COVID-19 is obviously top of mind, but there are other issues, natural disasters. Someone that I was speaking to as a title company out in Houston, he mentioned how they started to move to digital closing solutions pretty early on. And I believe when Hurricane Harvey hit, they were able to still to do some things because they were already aligning their process with digital tools to sort of reach people who couldn't come in to the office or so there's lots of other use cases where people it goes beyond convenience, and it has to do with safety and being able to transact on your real estate closing safely.
Yeah, when I was mentioning the digital boot camps that we did back in December, one of the samples that was shared was a woman who had some special needs and couldn't leave her home. And so they were able to make that work, so there are a lot of challenges for folks that could be overcome by being able to use the technology in this way.
Yeah, and also too, safety of notaries as well is another point that's been made to me. Using Ron, for mobile notaries going to places that they've never been, people they don't really know.
Yeah.
This offers an additional security measure for them as well as professionals.
Yeah. Right, absolutely.
So I was wondering if I could get your overall assessment on, the impact of COVID on the title industry and the real estate market. I know there's still a lot of uncertainty around it, but what is your assessment of what's happening with COVID?
I can just give you sort of anecdotally as we talk to our members, and we've done some surveys within our industry, and I think interesting enough, surprising right now anyway, many of our members did access PPP money, right? So a lot of that was able to keep people moving forward. We've seen record numbers. People are, refinancing because the interest rates have continued to stay low, and other things that people are really, really busy. A lot of folks are still hiring. I think from a real estate standpoint, I think it's more of inventory, right, in terms of availability. But I think people are buying. I think I read something yesterday, millennials are buying houses sight unseen more so than anybody. I actually saw something this morning, which I thought was very interesting, and maybe it was in the Housing Wire. It was how they're also selling them, they're willing to come down on their price quicker than others. So, clearly there's some new habits that we're seeing, in the industry that we hadn't seen before. And I think everybody's, recognizing that some things might go back, but I think that there's going to be a new normal, and there's going to be a lot of new additions to the market that we're going to need to be thinking about, moving forward. Buying houses sight unseen, right? People seem to be okay with that, right? Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I think keeping these interest rates low and keeping things moving along and being able to figure out how to make these things work for people, where you can, you don't have to take off from work, and you don't have to, you could do it at 10 o'clock at night. You can really work with folks in terms of their availability, which I think is, really appeals to the primary, the largest audience of potential new home buyers, which is millennials.
Yeah, and also Generation Z is starting to reach the age where in a couple of years they'll also be buying homes too. I think a lot of people still think of everyone under the age of 30 as millennials, but
right.
there's a whole new generation coming up, and they've got vastly different consumer habits as well.
Right. It's really interesting. And of course, I think what I'm hearing, even just from my own, network of friends who are real estate agents, people don't really think they need to live close in anymore. They're willing to live a lot of further away. I read something this morning, 75% of folks who are working from home want to continue that way. even within our own organization, Washington, D.C. is starting, I think we're in phase 2, or maybe we're coming around to it soon. And we were talking about, going back into the office, and majority of our folks didn't want to go back anytime soon. So, we're getting the job done. We have other issues like public transportation and safety issues that, we want to make sure we keep everybody healthy. But it's just, I think we're all going to look at things differently, for the next 6 to 12 months on how we do our business and how we get the work done.
Yeah, I know. I read statistics on millennial home buying habits as well. And one of the things that that reminds me of is commute time. Millennials definitely want to reduce their commute time as much as possible. And if you can eliminate that totally, I think that most people, everyone hates sitting in traffic or getting on the train or getting on a bus,
and the stress of it, and just think how less stressful it is when you don't have to think about those things.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there's also the other thing I do want to mention, Amanda. I think, we don't really know, if there is a second wave. We really don't know what's going to happen when the PP money, P money runs out. So I do think we need to really be thoughtful and as I tell my team all the time, plan for the worst, and hope for the best, because there's a lot of unknowns still that I think things could shift. And I think I was having a conversation with one of our board members this morning who is from First American. We were saying, that's the thing. Today, things can shift on a, really quickly. You have to be very nimble and you have to stay on top of things because, there's still a whole lot of uncertainty out there. I think we're all surprised at where we are right now, but we're not sort of sitting on our laurels by any means. We recognize that, it's a very dynamic, economic, social, all of those pieces that we just, with so much going on, it could just affect things in so many different ways.
Beyond, COVID-19 and remote online notarization, what are some other recent developments in the title industry or real estate industry at large that you think people should be aware of right now?
Yeah, I think to your point, there's, when we look at who the new home buyers are, right, and what their habits are, I think that's really, really important. I think I mentioned to you, for us in particular, the refinancing has been really going gangbusters, as interest rates stay low, people are looking at those things. I also think that there's, a opportunity with some of the pros testing and other things that we're learning for, to look at our industry and think of who our clients are and how do we reflect what they look like. So there's an opportunity to really be more diverse. We talked about, how getting women into leadership positions, within our industry. There's a lot, more than 75% as we talked, but not all of them are in leadership positions. So getting them, in that place, it's something we really want to focus on, as well as the diversity inclusion piece, because it's the right thing to do, but it's also good business, right? That's who's going to be buying our homes and, that we're going to be serving. So having a better understanding of our audience, and that's something, at ALTA we want to continue to do.
That's great. I love hearing that. I love knowing that you as an organization are focused on that, you're aware of that, and you're looking for solutions to move forward where everyone can come along and everyone can really actually be a part of that American dream of home ownership. It just helps to build stronger communities, in my opinion, when people can own their home and take pride in their home. So I think that's a really important thing to highlight for sure.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure you feel this way, Amanda. I know I do. I think our I know our membership, but also our industry, they're all very big parts of their communities. They're already doing stuff above and beyond. That's because it's the nature of who they are. And so, having this conversation, it's important to spotlight these really important things and to make sure that we're not forgetting everybody, and we all have to step back. I think we've all learned, and we all can continue to learn in the last few weeks of how important that is.
That sort of leads into my next question too, about advocacy and education. Are there any other things right now that ALTA is championing? You mentioned the Telling Your Story campaign. Is there anything else maybe related to homeowners, Homeowner Month of June that you'd like to share?
Yeah, there's, on the advocacy front, obviously data privacy continues to be really, really important for us because we know how important that is, for our members. I will mention back on the Ron stuff, one thing that we have done, the ALTA registry, We've now added people who are RON able are on there. So if you're not a member of our registry, but if you need to access that information, you should, because I think that was something that we did really quickly, and we were able to sort of get up and running because we knew how important that was. You know, one of the other things we learned about throughout this industry through COVID, was the importance of the counties, you know, staying open, and the county recorders. And so we've been tracking that kind of information because, you know, to the point you made earlier, you know, this is a health crisis, but what if it was like what happened to Baltimore, you know, they got shut down? You know, there could be lots of other ways that, you know, our industry can be stunted. And so we put in some things that we can sort of measure the gap times, keep track of a lot of these things. So we've become much more aware of, you know, what I would call like the supply chain, right, of how that works, and making sure that we have a handle on how that's going to affect our members, and coming up with new innovative ways to anticipate, you know, potential crises that go along with that. And then we have, on the advocacy front, we do have things like Safe Banking Act, which is really important to many of our members, that we are continuing to promote. And, you know, I think the other big thing is we have a presidential election coming up, right? And so making sure that we continue to, we're on it from a internal aspect at ALTA, we're working really hard with our outreach efforts in terms of developing ambassadors. So local ALTA members who have relationships with their elected officials, making sure that we're building those relationships and arming them with the knowledge of tell our story, so they can be reaching out to them and making sure that they share with them what our top priorities are and what's important to us, and, you know, what we need to continue to help, you know, keep this economy going. So I think this has been a time for us to be more thoughtful and strategic and planning. When there's not, I mean, there's hearings going on. We did actually just yesterday, you mentioned this earlier, and I did meant to kind of talk a little bit more about this. Brad Sherman, Congressman from North Dakota, did host a hearing on wire fraud. And that is another thing that our staff really helped facilitate, and to have that happen. And we recognize the really importance, and having, you know, elected officials know how important this is and what's happening. So we're trying to keep that issue has become even more important as everybody's been using, you know, technology. It's become, you know, another, and the National Association of Realtors has approached us. We're having conversations with them. They're starting a campaign on talking about, you know, how to combat wire fraud, which we're really excited about, and we're happy to provide them with all the information that we've done. We've partnered with the CFPB on making sure people understand the challenges of it. So we're continuing to, you know, the wire fraud is obviously continues, and it's a really important consumer outreach effort. So the more voices that are echoing it, and, you know, what, like we were saying earlier, most potential home buyers, they usually, the realtor is sort of their first point of contact. So, you know, if we can share with them the information that we have on, you know, what to look for and how to anticipate really important things, like, you know, on the emails, making sure you have a secure email, you know, and never ever, you know, changing where you're going to send the money at that last minute, you know, all of those things. The more voices that are aware of that, the more we can prevent that.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that I had. Is there anything else that you would like to share? Any other thoughts that you have?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, just as a wrap up, thank you for this opportunity. I really enjoyed chatting with you today, Amanda, and I love the kind of work that you're doing. One thing that I've started doing since COVID-19 is listening to podcasts, and they're really helpful. They really help you really get into, like, you know, the nuts and bolts of things. So I applaud you for getting this up and running. The second thing I will say, one of the things we've been trying to do is like be that link for folks as new things are happening and education. And so we've got a series of webinars that we've been doing when new things break at the national level, so we can help break it down on what does this mean to you in the title industry. So that's been really important to us. And of course, you know, we're not doing any in-person events through the end of the year. Is a decision that we made, which I think was a smart one and a healthy one and good. But in the meantime, we have some virtual events. We've got a digital boot camp that's going to be, it was already scheduled to be in August. I think we're going to be in Minnesota, but we're going to do it digital. we're in the process of, that's going to be, revamped to sort of reflect the new digital world, but we're partnering with the NBA on that. So that's in August. ALTA 1 is going to be virtual this year, and we plan on putting that information out next week to the whole world, but it's going to be a really exciting. And part of what we're hoping to do is, a lot of folks who for whatever reason couldn't take the time off, couldn't afford to participate in some of those in-person events, use this time to really be able to provide them with the information and get them more engaged on the efforts within ALTA, which we really know will benefit everybody within the industry.
And do you want to plug maybe any online resources that you would like to share with the audience regarding any of the topics that we talked about today?
Yes, thank you. As you know, we have our HOP program, and all of this can be found on alta.org. We've been doing a COVID-19 daily update that's going to be moved to weekly. But as you know, we have the news you can use that comes out daily. We have title news. Jeremy does a good job on all of these big issues that are popping up, and all of it can be all accessed on alta.org. So thank you for that opportunity. And we would love to hear from folks too. If there's something that we're not doing that we should be doing, we're all ears.
And you also mentioned the directory. That's free to sign up with, correct?
Yes. But the ALTA registry, it was the other one. That's one that you would definitely re-encourage people, because what we're finding is, people are, if they want to do RON, they want to know who does it in these other states. And now that the geographic piece is moving. So it's a really, really valuable tool for people.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for hosting me, Amanda. It's been great getting to chat with you, and I really appreciate all you're doing for our industry too.
Thanks again to Diane for joining us. For industry resources and to view the new video, Our Title is Protection, be sure to visit the ALTA website at alta.org. Title Talks is produced by PropLogix and myself. Original music is by Cole Sando. Original graphics are by Jordan Norris. If you have an idea for an episode, please email us at title.talks@proplogix.com. That's PROPLOGIX.com. Until next time, happy closings.